Thank you. Now, Deputy Róisín Shortall has raised the next issue, and the Deputy has 4 minutes to make an initial statement.
Thank you, Lascan Corler, and I want to thank Minister Varadkar for coming into the House to respond to this debate. I don't need to tell the Minister that we have very serious problems here in Ireland with substance misuse. Obviously, the number one problem is with alcohol, but all of the evidence would indicate that the number two problem is the misuse of prescription drugs, in particular benzodiazepines and Z-drugs. Vast quantities of prescription drugs are available in our streets. We've all seen the effect of that in Dublin city centre in particular, and the serious antisocial activity that goes with it. This kind of street trading and related activity is clearly very intimidating for the public. It also undermines the efforts of health professionals to find a long-term path to recovery for those people who are using drugs. And of course it is damaging to business and to tourism in the city centre. There are two principal sources for these prescription drugs. One is the overprescribing of these drugs in our health service, and the other is uncontrolled imports. The current law is very weak in both of these respects, Minister. Obviously, benzodiazepines have a very important role to play in the treatment of people with mental health issues. But the figures show that by European standards, we have much higher than average prescribing rates. And also then, when it comes to imports, in many respects the hands of the Gardaí and customs are tied because of inadequate legislation. Almost 3 years ago, when I was in the Department of Health, I initiated a renewed focus on the problem of the overuse of benzodiazepines and Z-drugs. A number of measures were initiated, including a project where the PCRS tracked the prescribing patterns of GPs, and there was an intervention with those GPs where the prescribing pattern was particularly out of kilter with the rest of the GP population. A review of the regulations under the Misuse of Drugs Act was initiated and provided for several measures to help curtail the availability of these drugs on our streets. These measures included new import and export controls, new possession offences, stricter prescribing and dispensing requirements. The Department conducted consultations with interest groups in the summer of 2012 and took on board any issues raised. The Department amended their plans to reflect these. A preliminary draft of the regulations was shown to me before I left office in September of that year, 2012. However, for some reason it took another entire year for a draft set of regulations to be published on the Department's website. Over 2 years ago, the projected timeframe for the completion of the new regulations was by the following January. Now, 2 years later, the timeframe, again based on recent PQ replies, is still next January. It is not clear to me, Minister, what exactly is holding up the regulations at this stage. The unit dealing with this legislation in the Department of Health was among the best in that department in my experience, so I can't believe that the fault lies there. And other senior officials should be well aware of the problem, because it is not unknown for these prescription drugs to be traded right outside your department's front door on Hawkins Street. You may even have seen it yourself, Minister. This is a serious drug problem that can be effectively dealt with. The government is now 2 years late with the necessary legislation, and it's time this was made a top priority in the Department of Health, and I hope you'll do that, Minister.
Minister, 4 minutes to
I thank the Deputy for raising this matter. Benzodiazepines are a class of medicine available on prescription, which are commonly used to treat anxiety, sleep disturbance and insomnia. They are known to be associated with dependence and withdrawal symptoms, and consequently are primarily recommended for short-term treatment only. They are a valuable treatment option when used correctly. However, there is increasing evidence of inappropriate use of benzos in Europe, a problem which is not particular to Ireland. Under the Medicinal Products Prescription and Controlled Supply Regulations, it's an offence for a person, except where the person is a pharmacist or working under the personal supervision of a pharmacist, to supply prescription medicine. These regulations also make it illegal for prescription medicines to be supplied by mail order over the internet. Additional levels of control are applied to medicines which have a high potential to be misused by means of regulations made under the Misuse of Drugs Act. These regulations impose restrictions on the production, supply, importation, exportation of controlled drugs such as morphine, methadone, amphetamines and benzos. A person who has in his possession or her possession a prescription medicine containing a drug controlled under the Misuse of Drugs legislation for unauthorised sale or supply is guilty of an offence under that legislation. Different levels of control apply to drugs controlled under the Misuse of Drugs legislation, dependent on their therapeutic value and potential for abuse. The Department has been reviewing the Misuse of Drugs regulation to introduce stricter controls on benzodiazepines. In particular, it is proposed to apply formal import and export controls on benzos, thereby making it an offence for a person to import or export these drugs without a licence. The introduction of these controls will also provide comprehensive national information on the level of use of benzos and the trade in benzos. It is also proposed to introduce stricter prescribing and dispensing controls for benzodiazepines, as well as the introduction of an offence for a person to possess benzodiazepines without an entitlement, e.g. prescription. Thereby, it's believed assisting the Gardaí and Customs Service in enforcing the illicit import and dealing in those drugs. Following a consultation process, a draft amendment regulation was prepared and made available for further consultation on the Department's website. Submissions were received from a wide range of organisations and individuals, including doctors, pharmacists, the Pharmaceutical Society of Ireland, the Irish Pharmacy Union, private and public hospitals, both from medical practitioners and pharmacists, nursing homes, drug treatment centres and experts in addiction services. These submissions raised a number of legislative issues which require further consideration before finalising the amendments. This process, I'm told, is taking longer than anticipated because it's a complex and technical body of work. Some further work is required, and the objective is to finalise the text of the draft regulations early in the new year. Once the draft regulations are ready, they are subject to a 3-month EU notification period under the Technical Standards Directive before they can be signed into law. This is because of the implications of the proposed regulatory changes on trade in pharmaceutical products. There is no doubt that the scale and nature of the drug problem in Ireland is constantly evolving. The emergence of new psychoactive substances, the increase of cannabis, weed, and the prevalence of polydrug use represent serious challenges for our services in responding to the needs of vulnerable groups. The response of HSE has involved the reorientation of its addiction services in order to develop a comprehensive integrated addiction treatment service capable of dealing with all substances. The HSE continues to cooperate with the local community representatives, particularly in the Dublin city centre area, and liaise with local Gardaí to minimise any negative public order issues that may arise.
Róisín Shortall.
Minister, I have to say your response is very, very disappointing. There's no sense of urgency at all from you in this regard. This is a major problem that we have right across the country, but it's most prevalent in the Dublin city centre area. You'll be getting that feedback from all of the local drugs task forces as well. You know, prescription drugs after alcohol are the biggest problem that communities are dealing with. Now, you know, you'd have to ask why no action is being taken on this. This is really at the same stage as it was at 2 years ago. The draft regulations were almost ready to go in January 2013. Here we are now, almost 2 years later, and the issue doesn't seem to have moved on at all. Like, is there a problem with resources in the department? Are you actually allocating staff? And are you personally saying that to your staff that you want this to be a priority? Because it is a priority for everybody else working in this area, and it's certainly a priority from the point of view of the Gardaí. The law is too weak for them to tackle the problem in an effective way. So, you know, you have to ask, are there vested interests coming into play here? Why is it that you're not tackling the problem? It's in your hands to do something really effective about this problem, and yet it doesn't seem to be given any priority. There was a report back in 2002 which was left to gather dust, and my concern is that the same is going to happen in relation to these draft regulations. Minister, the solution is largely in your hands, and I'm making a very sincere appeal to you to please take this issue seriously. It's devastating a lot of lives, it's causing an awful lot of problem, and it's in your hands to actually make a meaningful difference to the problem. Please act on it as soon as possible.
Minister, to conclude.
Yeah, well, first of all, as Deputy will be aware, staff are allocated by the Secretary-General, not by me personally. This regulation is not on my desk, and I haven't seen it yet, so certainly I'm not holding it up. It's delayed, obviously, elsewhere, and I'll certainly undertake to ask some questions about that. The feedback, though, that does come from the different groups in the local drug task forces, many of whom I've met in the last few weeks, is actually mixed. There are quite a number of them who take the view that criminalising possession of all drugs is actually not the way to go. So it's not the case that everyone takes the view that criminalisation is the way to go.
Come on. The next item is the raised by Deputy Brendan Griffin. Deputy has 4 minutes to make the initial statement.
And thank you, Minister, for